The reason why the first of the Hermetic principles is mentalism. It's so core to understanding all the rest. Each stacks on each other. And when you realize that, then you start realizing that every experience that you have is not just happening to you, it's actually happening for you. Whether you're conscious of it or not is up to you. You may not be aware of it until later on. And we just think that the world's happening to us. Oh my gosh, something bad happened. Oh, life is difficult. Woe is me. I'm a victim, blah, blah, blah. Well, or you can look at it differently and say, what is my you inverse or my subconscious mind, the lens through which I'm seeing the world, trying to teach me, my higher self, trying to project back to me so that I will come to that realization. You know, you could go to school for years and years and years and study the didactics, but until you experience it in some sort of a role play that you believe is actually real, you haven't really fully learned it. Mm. And so often people will say, well, what does all this stuff mean? You know, how does this help or save the whales? Or how does this save deforestation or whatever? Well, if you actually study further into this, you'll realize that what we judge will just continue to be projected back to us. So in a way, when you start to really go down this rabbit hole of, okay, I'm going to be an advocate for this, that, or the other thing, by your own judgments of those things.
Especially advocate against.
Yeah, exactly. You will only perpetuate those things. It's the hammer and nail situation. Mm-hmm. And that comes out of all of this, you know, understanding of the Hermetic principles. And I think that's why it's so powerful for me. But one thing I want to mention also, when you ask who is Thoth and who is Hermes. Hermes, you can learn a lot about him also. So there's several books. Kybalion is one. Mm-hmm. It's excellent, by the three initiates. I love it. And you can listen to it on YouTube. It's fantastic. Around the same time, there was a translation that came out of the Emerald Tablets. So talking about the early 20th century. And in the early 20th century, there was kind of a bit of a mini renaissance that was happening. You saw a lot of advances in physics that was happening at that time, right? You saw people like Walter Russell. They started creating societies of like polymathic thought, like the Twilight Club in New York City that Walter Russell was a founder of. And I'm excited because I'm going to probably go and speak at his university in Virginia here in the next few weeks or so. But basically there was this small little mini kind of, I'd say right around the turn of the century up until probably around, the crash in 1929. There was this really interesting time happening. It was kind of the roaring 20s and there was a very different philosophy and thought. Art was also exploding at that time. And what you find during that period of time is that people were going through these sort of expansions. So you hear about also, leading up into that late 19th century, like Helena Blavatsky, and Rudolf Steiner and other people that were kind of luminaries during this period of the world. And there was this expansion going on. So one of those things that came out of this was not only the work by the three initiates and the Kybalion, but also the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. Now, Emerald Tablets have been around for a long time, but there were different translations of it. This was a channel translation that was done by a guy by the name of Dorial. So I would definitely look into that because it tells a story also of Thoth the Atlantean. So it goes all the way back in time and tells a story, and he actually claims in this writing that he built the pyramid. He was the designer of it. Now, it's funny because in Egyptian history, they tell the story of a guy by the name of Hemiunu. Hemiunu would have been the architect for the Great Pyramid. But Hemiunu sounds a lot like Hermiunu, right? Mm-hmm. It could definitely be some sort of connection between the two. And when you get into that, you can learn the whole story about how Atlantis fell and then how civilization was maintained, how they moved to Kem, the land of Kem, Egypt.
Which is where, if people have listened to my podcast, Matthias De Stefano remembers life he lived as a woman with a child and sings the songs, and it's pretty remarkable. Yeah. And he tells stories of Thoth as a being, as a being in the flesh, not just a deity that's a aggregation of energy that people are worshiping, but no, it was a being.
Yeah, and he was sort of like, you could think of him as the king of the land also for thousands of years, in fact. And so, depending on which historical timeline you kind of like prescribe to, one of them is The pyramids are something on the order more of about 13,000 years old. Some are even older still. That it was before the Yunga Dryas, and we had like some major calamity that happened, around after that time. Also, the flood kind of plays into this. But basically, that story is worth reading. Mm-hmm. It's worth going through. There's something about it where we all kind of have this ability to know if something is worth listening to or reading. And as the words permeate into your consciousness, there's something very powerful about that particular book. It's fascinating. And it's written in a very prose kind of way. So it's beautifully written. It feels like scripture in a way. It's got this kind of holy feeling to it. And I probably read it and listened to it at least 200 times.
Wow.
And every time I listen to it or read it, I get something entirely new from it. It's there's something very powerful about it. Same thing with Kybalion. Kybalion's another good example. The Hermeticum is also another one that is worth reading. It's a short book, and it's a reiteration of a lot of these principles that have been passed down generation after generation, sometimes through sort of hidden secret society type stuff. It's hidden so that it can be found.
So if we do our job, you'll both not need to read these books and be even more excited to read these books.
Yes, that's right.
So that's what we're here to do. So this podcast and pretty much everything I do is made possible by Onnit. And the great thing about Onnit is it's a company where I created all of the best products that would support me in a holistic life, physically, mentally, through all of the human optimization technologies that Onnit offers and is available. And this ranges from kettlebells to the steel clubs, the steel maces, to the Alpha Brain, which I use before every podcast, and the Shroom Tech, which I use before every workout, and the Total NO that I use when I want to flex in the gym and have a really good workout. Really, everything that I've ever wanted from a human optimization standpoint is offered through Onnit. So I encourage you guys to check it out. Go to onnit.com/Aubrey and you'll save 10% off absolutely everything. And thank you for your support of Onnit, which is directly support to me. Thanks, fam. So let me go through a couple of these different notes that I had. The first note, this is a quote from the Kybalion. The principles of truth are 7. He who knows these understandingly possesses the magic key before whose touch all the doors of the temple fly open. The key. So these are that's exactly what these have been. These have been keys for me to start unlocking these different rooms in my psyche. Like if I can use this key correctly, and we'll talk about some of the ways that I've used these keys already, but I know I'm just now getting on the journey. But when you were talking about the principle of mentalism, this one key, the all is mind, the universe is mental, what you were previously saying about how things that you're projecting out into the world are reflected back to you. Well, if you think of it as all one mind, then of course that's going to be the way that it's going for. And of course, also the other thing that you can look at with this key is if it is all one mind, everything is happening in right reason and right accord, right? Like whatever is going on, we may not be able to understand it from our perspective, but from the largest mental perspective, it may make perfect sense. And Matthias talks about this a lot. For part of the necessity of creation, of course, is polarity. We'll talk about the principle of polarity. But part of polarity requires distortion, and distortion is a force that prevents us from seeing everything as same. Seeing everything as all as one. Distortion comes in and says, "Oh, I am separate," and it's also been called Maya, the illusion. There's a lot of ways that you can look at this, but some way in which we're not seeing the absolute truth. Because if we saw the absolute truth, it'd be one note, one color, one sound, we would see beyond all of the differentiation.
We wouldn't get to experience our own differentiation.
Exactly. So within that, you start to understand, maybe this is all just a part of the symphony. And right now we could be in a part of the song that's like the deep, low, strident, viola part that's kind of building the intensity to anxiety. That's okay. It's all part of a big, grander symphony. And co-creatively, we're the conductors deciding how this orchestra goes.